Hey everyone, welcome back to Stadium Stats. Today we're going to be going over Week 13 of the NFL schedule and then going into our power rankings. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Coming up first on Thursday morning football, we've got a game between the Bears and the Lions, and this is a divisional matchup. The Bears, they're coming off a loss to the Vikings in a game that they brought to overtime in what was also a divisional matchup where Caleb Williams played really well up until overtime, where he took a sack that he really shouldn't have, and it might have cost them the game. But the Vikings ended up winning in overtime. The Bears played pretty well. Their offense looked really good. Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, and Rome Odunze and Cole Kmet all caught a bunch of passes for a ton of yards. Caleb Williams had 340 passing yards. Really good day for him. The Lions, on the other hand, they're also coming off a win over the Colts in a game where their defense held them to 0 points for the third time in a row in the second half. That's 3 weeks in a row where they've let up 0 points in the second half of a game. Their defense looks great. Their offense looks great, although they didn't look as explosive this week against the Colts, who don't really have that good of a defense. So it was a bit surprising. But the Lions are a really good team. The Bears have been playing their division opponents really tight. So I do think this will be a close game. I am going to pick the Lions to win, but I think because it's a divisional matchup, it'll be pretty close. Moving on Thursday afternoon football, we've got the Giants versus the Cowboys, another divisional matchup. The Giants, they're coming off a terrible loss to the Buccaneers, 30-7, in a game where they couldn't do anything almost the entire game. Their offense looked terrible. Their defense looked terrible. The Cowboys, on the other hand, they're coming off a crazy win over the Commanders in a game where it was 3-3 at halftime and ended 34-26 because there were 4 touchdowns scored in the last 3.5 minutes of regulation. The Cowboys' special teams looked incredible in this game as Kevontae Turpin returned a kick for a touchdown that really gave them the game. Their defense really didn't look that good, though, as they let up a huge touchdown to Terry McLaurin with under 30 seconds left, which was able to almost tie the game had the Commanders made the extra point, which they didn't. But the Cowboys, they're not a good team. The Giants aren't a good team either. I do think this will be close because they're both pretty bad teams with backup quarterbacks playing and a divisional matchup. But I'm actually going to go with the Giants to win this one. Typically, the Cowboys do have the Giants number. However, I think the Giants' defense will be too much for the Cowboys' offense to handle, and I don't think the Cowboys' defense will be able to stop the Giants' offense as bad as it is. The Cowboys' defense is even worse. Finally, on Thursday Night Football, we've got the Dolphins taking on the Packers. The Dolphins, they're coming off their third straight win in a game where they beat the Patriots 34-15, and that score is closer than the game actually was. The Dolphins had the game at 31-0 for a while, and then started letting up points. Their offense looked unbelievable. Jalen Waddle looked great. Jonnu Smith looked great. Tua looked great. And their defense was playing well up until garbage time when it didn't matter anymore. The Packers, on the other hand, they're coming off a win over the 49ers where they looked fantastic. The 49ers didn't have most of their star players. However, they did win 38-10 in a game where their offense looked unbelievable. Josh Jacobs had 3 touchdowns. Jordan Love didn't throw an interception. And their receivers really didn't even have to do all too much. But the Packers, they're a really good team. The Dolphins are also a rising team. And I actually think the Dolphins might take this one. The Dolphins tend to struggle in cold weather games, and this will be played in Lambeau Field. And so it is very possible that Tua continues his stretch of playing poorly in cold weather games. But if he's able to turn around that narrative, I do think the Dolphins have a chance to win this one, and I'm going to pick the Dolphins to win. Moving on Friday, Black Friday football, we've got a divisional matchup between the Raiders and the Chiefs. And this one really doesn't need a whole lot to be said. The Raiders, they're coming off a loss to the Broncos in a game where their offense didn't look terrible, but they did lose Gardner Minshew for the season with a broken collarbone. So now they're down to their third string quarterback in Desmond Ridder, who really doesn't give this team much hope. The Chiefs, on the other hand, they're coming off a terrible loss to the Panthers where for the third time all season, they let up over 25 points, and it was to Bryce Young and the Panthers, who scored 27 and only lost by a field goal right as the game expired. The Chiefs are able to come away with victories in almost every scenario. Their offense really doesn't have to look that good for them to win. Their defense has been playing great all season, but didn't play well against the Panthers, and they still were able to come away with the win. And I think nothing will be different here. It's a divisional opponent. Chiefs will find a way to win. I'm picking the Chiefs. Moving on, we've got another divisional matchup, this time on Sunday football, this time between the Texans and the Jaguars. The Texans, they're coming off a heartbreaking loss to the Titans in a game where they lost on a C.J. Stroud stepping out of the back of the end zone, a safety to lose them the game and turn the ball over. They did not play well. Their defense looked terrible. They had a lot of pressure on defense, but other than that, they couldn't stop Will Levis and the Titans, and Tony Pollard ran all over them. Their offense looked all right, but really just couldn't do well enough to beat the Titans. The Jaguars, on the other hand, they're coming off a loss to the bye week. Yes, they can't even beat the bye week. Just kidding, obviously. But the Jaguars are a really bad team. They really needed that bye week. But they've been playing terribly all season. They are a lot of people's worst teams in the leagues in power rankings. And they also have one of the worst defenses in the league. They just have not been living up to potential. And I think even though the Texans did just lose to the Titans, I think they'll bounce back and beat the Jaguars. But I also wouldn't be surprised if the Jaguars keep it close because it is a divisional matchup, and the Texans have been struggling lately. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the Colts and the Patriots. The Colts, they're coming off a loss to the Lions in a game where they only scored 6 points, but their defense did do pretty well at stopping the Lions. They only let up 24 points, which doesn't seem like a lot, but the Lions have been so explosive and have scored over 50 points over the last 2 weeks in each game, so it was a lot better of a defensive showing than in previous weeks. The Colts are decent. Anthony Richardson has been playing a lot better recently, but they're still not a great team. The Patriots, on the other hand, they're coming off a terrible loss to the Dolphins where they couldn't do anything until the fourth quarter. Drake May threw a touchdown, and then he threw another one, and they played all right in the fourth quarter, but that was about it. They're not a good team. The Colts are better. I do think the Colts will win. I think the Patriots are one of the worst teams in the league, and the Colts are just mediocre, so I think the Colts will win. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the Chargers and the Falcons. The Chargers, they're coming off a loss on Monday Night Football to the Ravens in a game where they lost by 1 touchdown, but they let up a ton of yards to Derrick Henry, which is no surprise to anybody. And they let up a big touchdown to Rashad Bateman, which was a surprise because their pass defense has been amazing all season. The Falcons, on the other hand, they're coming off a bye week, which was much needed after their terrible loss to the Broncos 6-38 2 weeks ago. They really need a bounce-back game, and I do think the Falcons are a decent team who struggles in inopportune moments, such as that Broncos game. So I do think this will be a close game, but I think the Chargers will win as their coaching is better and their defense is better, and I think that will be too much for the Falcons to be able to handle. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the Seahawks and the Jets. The Seahawks, they're coming off a divisional win over the Cardinals in a game where they basically won off a pick six because it was such a big swing in the game, and the Cardinals just couldn't do anything. Their defense looked fantastic as they held the Cardinals to only 6 points, but their offense really didn't look that good as they only scored 1 touchdown on offense, and that was basically all of their points on offense. They are taking on the Jets, who are coming off a bye week. Much needed. They are a terrible team and really shouldn't be. Who knows what will happen with Aaron Rodgers, whether he'll play in this game or whether he'll be cut or put on IR. It's really unclear what's going to happen to him in the future, but it doesn't look like he's going to be a Jet for very much longer. The Jets have really struggled all season. Their defense has really taken a turn downhill ever since they fired their head coach Robert Saleh early in the season, and their offense really just can't get a lot going, even though they have a ton of offensive firepower. I am going to pick the Seahawks to win this one. I do think they're a better team, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Jets are able to bounce back and rally after their bye week. I just don't really have a lot of hope for them right now. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the Titans and the Commanders. The Titans, they're coming off a win over the Texans in a game where they actually looked really good. Will Levis played pretty well. Calvin Ridley played pretty well, and that Tony Pollard played really well, and that offense was actually firing. Their defense did not look that great, but they came up when it really mattered most, and they were able to win that game. The Commanders, on the other hand, they lost to the Cowboys in another divisional matchup. That's 3 straight losses for the Commanders. They look to be taking a downhill turn for this season as they started off super strong and haven't won a game in a few weeks. they are still a really good team, and I do think they'll be able to take on the Titans pretty easily, as I don't think the Titans are very good, and I think the Commanders can outmatch them pretty easily. However, the Titans have been playing better recently, and the Commanders have been playing worse, so I wouldn't be surprised if the Titans were able to make this a game. I just don't think it will be that much of a good game, as I think the Commanders are a much better team than the Titans, and I'm going with the Commanders to win. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the Steelers and the Bengals. The Steelers, they're coming off a heartbreaking loss to the Browns on Thursday Night Football, where their defense and offense just did not perform as well as they have been most of the season, especially their offense. Russell Wilson didn't look very good. They didn't have a run game. They didn't really have much of a pass game, and they just couldn't score very many points, and lost to a bad divisional opponent in the Browns. The Bengals, on the other hand, they're coming off a bye week. They are still in the playoff race, but their defense being as bad as it is and having lost as many close games as they have, it doesn't look very hopeful for them to make the playoffs. But I actually do think this will be a really close game, as the AFC North tends to play each other really close. The Steelers and Ravens just played. The Steelers and Browns just played. Both of those were one-score games, and I think the Steelers will play the Bengals in a one-score game. And I actually think the Bengals have a decent shot at winning this, as their offense is arguably the best that the Steelers have faced in a while, although the Steelers were able to hold the Ravens to only 16 points, which was a really impressive performance. But I am still going to pick the Steelers to win this one. I do think their defense will be able to hold the Bengals at least a little bit, and their offense will be able to do kind of whatever against that Bengals terrible defense. So I am going to pick the Steelers to win in a pretty close matchup. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the Cardinals and the Vikings. The Cardinals, they're coming off a terrible loss to the Seahawks in a game where they only scored 6 points. They threw a pick six, and really just did not look very good. They didn't look like the team they've looked like for the past couple weeks. The Vikings, on the other hand, they played a really close game. They let the Bears come back and bring the game into overtime when they really should not have. That Vikings defense collapsed in the fourth quarter. But they're still a really good team. Their offense really works when it needs to. They were able to rally in the overtime and score to win the game. And the Vikings are a much better team than the Cardinals, so I am going to pick the Vikings to win this one. I wouldn't be surprised if the Cardinals were able to play pretty well, but the Vikings defense is the best defense the Cardinals have played recently, and given their offense couldn't do anything against the Seahawks defense, I don't have a lot of hope for the Cardinals, so I'm going to pick the Vikings. Moving on to the 3 o'clock window, we've got a matchup between the Rams and the Saints. The Rams, they're coming off a terrible loss in a game where they let up 250 rushing yards to Saquon against the Eagles on Sunday Night Football. Their defense looked terrible. Their offense was performing pretty well as Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp continued to look amazing with Matthew Stafford, but their defense couldn't stop Saquon for anything. The Saints, they're coming off a bye. Much needed bye. They're not a good team, but they're explosive when they need to be. And Marquez Valdes-Scantling has really proved to be a nice signing for them over the past few weeks, as he's had a few really big touchdowns. Derek Carr's played better. They are missing a lot of key pieces, as their top 2 receivers in Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed are both out and put on IR. But I don't think the Saints are a very good team. I wouldn't be surprised if this was a close game, as the Saints are really explosive and they could explode in this game and score a ton of points. And I really actually think this game will be a shootout, as both offenses are much better than their defenses. That being said, I am going to pick the Rams to win in what I think will be a pretty big shootout. Rams win. Moving on, we've got a divisional matchup between the Buccaneers and the Panthers. The Buccaneers, they're coming off a massive win over the Giants, 30-7, in a game where their offense played unbelievable, their defense played unbelievable, letting up only 1 touchdown the whole game. And yes, it was against the Giants, but their offense played really well against that Giants defensive line, which is really formidable. And I really was impressed by that offensive performance. The Panthers, they're coming off an amazing game. They did lose in the last seconds, but they took the Chiefs right down to the wire and lost only by 3. They were the 3rd team all season to score over 25 points on the Chiefs. And Bryce Young has really turned his season around. After getting benched and being reinstated, his passer rating has gone way up. His touchdowns have gone way up, and he's just looked like a different player. He looks like he's actually improving. That being said, the Buccaneers are a much better team than the Panthers, and I do think while this is a divisional matchup and it could be played pretty close, I do think the Buccaneers should get the win pretty easily. Although the Panthers have been playing a lot better recently, so I really wouldn't be surprised if they kept it a game. I just don't think they'll win. So I'm going to pick the Buccaneers. Moving on, we've got a bird matchup between the Eagles and the Ravens. The Eagles, they're coming off a major win over the Rams in a game where Saquon Barkley exploded for 255 yards on two 70-plus yard rushing touchdowns. He looked fantastic. That offense as a whole looked fantastic. And their defense continues to play unbelievable football and continues to be one of the best and most formidable units in the entire league. The Ravens, on the other hand, they're coming off a win on Monday Night Football in the Harbaugh Bowl as the Harbaugh brothers faced off against each other. And the Ravens came away with a win by 1 touchdown. Their offense played unbelievable. Their defense played all right, which was all they needed from them because the Chargers have been really good on both offense and defense, but their Chargers defense could not stop the Ravens offense in that game, especially Derrick Henry. I think this will be a really close one, and I think it'll be a really interesting one as the top 2 leading rushers in the league are Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry. And so I do think this will be a big running game. And I think it'll be pretty close. It could be a shootout, but I think the fact that the Eagles' defense is as good as it is means the Eagles will win, as the Ravens' defense just can't contain the Eagles' offense, whereas the Eagles' defense might be able to contain the Ravens' offense. So I'm going to pick the Eagles to win in what I think has the potential to be a shootout if the Eagles' defense lets it be. However, I think the Eagles' defense might be too good for that to be the case, so I'm going to pick the Eagles to win. Moving on, we've got a matchup on Sunday Night Football between the 49ers and the Bills. The 49ers, they're coming off a loss to the Packers in a game where they didn't have their starting quarterback, they didn't have one of their starting receivers, they didn't have their starting offensive line left tackle, who's a Hall of Famer, and they didn't have their starting edge rusher, who's an unbelievable player as well. They were destined to lose, but they lost in terrible fashion. They lost 10-38 in a game where against the Packers, where they just couldn't do anything. The only good bright side for that team was George Kittle, but their defense couldn't stop anything. They had the most missed tackles of any game this whole season, and that defense looks terrible. They are possibly getting Dre Greenlaw back pretty soon, and I think that'll be a big boost to that defense, but that defense is just not the same that it has been in the past, and just doesn't look really good at all. The Bills, on the other hand, they're coming off a bye week. They are well rested and are going to be able to play at full power. They are coming off a game the week before where they beat the Chiefs 30-21. They were able to be the first team to beat the Chiefs, and it was a really impressive performance. Their offense looks great. Their defense looked all right, but didn't even need to do that much because their offense was performing so well. And I do think the Bills will win this one, as I think their offense is too much for the 49ers defense to handle, and it'll also depend on whether or not Brock Purdy and Nick Bosa and Trent Williams are able to play in this game. And I do think all 3 of them playing is crucial to the 49ers standing a chance in this game. If they all play, I think it'll be relatively close. If they don't play, I think the Bills take it pretty easily, but I'm going to pick the Bills to win in either situation anyways. Moving on Monday Night Football, we've got a matchup between the Browns and the Broncos. The Browns, they're coming off a divisional win over the Steelers in a game on Thursday Night Football where they played really well in the snow. Jameis Winston has really given a boost to this offense and has looked a lot better than Deshaun Watson did at any point this season. And their defense really was able to hold the Steelers. They forced a couple fumbles, and they looked pretty good on defense. The Broncos, on the other hand, they are coming off a win over the Raiders in a game where they won 29-19. They should have maybe beaten a bad Raiders team by more, but it was a divisional matchup, so I'm not surprised that it was close. And the fact that it was a 2-score game actually goes in the Broncos' favor for a divisional matchup. I do think the Broncos are a much better team than the Browns. However, the Browns have been able to rally a lot lately, and that's mainly been against their divisional opponents, which the Broncos are not. So I'm going to pick the Broncos to win this one. However, I wouldn't be surprised if Jameis Winston rallies the team and is able to get a win. I just think the Broncos have been on a rally lately. They've been winning games big, and I think they'll continue to win games. Moving on, taking a look at our power rankings. At number 10, I've got the Vikings. They've been playing teams really close lately. They really just haven't looked as good, but they're winning games, and their defense continues to play pretty impressively when it matters most, just like they did in that overtime against Caleb Williams and the Bears. And they've been able to come away with wins, and I think they will continue to win. I just don't think that they're playing opponents as well as they should be, so for that reason, they fall into number 10. At 9, I've got the Broncos. They've won a bunch of games in a row. They destroyed the Falcons 2 weeks ago, and they've just looked a lot better on both offense and defense. Bo Nix is seemingly taken over as the front runner for Rookie of the Year, for Offensive Rookie of the Year, and I think he'll continue to play really well, and the Broncos will continue to succeed. At 8, I've got the Steelers. They just lost to a team they really shouldn't have in the Browns. However, it is a divisional game, and they beat the Ravens the week before in a divisional game. Divisional games tend to be played close, and they've been winning games. Russell Wilson has looked good in all but that game, so I am going to give them a pass for that game, but it did drop them a little bit. At 7, I've got the Chargers. They've been playing unbelievable on defense up until they played against the Ravens. And again, I'll give them a slight. It is the Ravens who have an unbelievable offense, and they were able to play that game relatively close as it was one score by the end of the game. However, it ended up looking a lot less close than that during most of the game. And for that reason, they're falling down to number 7. At 6, I've got the Packers. They've been playing really well. They destroyed the 49ers. And yes, the 49ers were really beat up, but it was probably pretty relieving for them as the 49ers have had their number for multiple seasons now, especially in the playoffs. But the Packers have been playing really well on offense. Josh Jacobs is getting a lot more involved. Their main flaw is that Jordan Love has been throwing a lot of interceptions, but they've been making up for it because their defense is getting a lot of interceptions, such as Xavier McKinney, who has 7 on the season, and their defense looks great. So for that reason, they're at 6. At 5, I've got the Ravens. They've been playing unbelievable on offense. Their defense had stepped up against the Chargers a little bit, but they really haven't been playing all too well most of the season, and that's the main thing that's holding them back. They do have one of the best offenses, if not the best offense in the entire league, as Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson are both in the MVP conversation, especially Lamar Jackson, who's possibly even leading that MVP conversation. And so because of their offense, they've been carried to number 5, despite their defense. At 4, I've got the Chiefs. They find a way to win games. They're not playing well. 8 of their 10 wins have been one-score wins, which is really unimpressive. And they just barely beat the Panthers, who are not a good team, and they let up over 25 points against them. Their defense did not look as good, but I can't put them any lower because they found ways to win games in every scenario besides against the Bills, and the Bills are a really good team. So I am going to say the Chiefs are still a really good team, and they find ways to win when it matters. They're just not playing teams as well as they should. At 3, I've got the Eagles. Their offense has been playing unbelievable. Their defense has been playing unbelievable, if not the best unit in the entire league. Saquon has been the best running back in the whole league, and there's really no stopping him. He just had over 250 rushing yards against the Rams and is also in the MVP conversation. Unbelievable season for him and that defense, who continues to improve. Eagles at 3. At 2, I've got the Bills. They've been playing unbelievable. They're the only team to take down the Chiefs. They're coming off a bye, are well-rested. They just look really unstoppable. Their offense is one of the best units, again, if not the best unit, only competing realistically with the Ravens and possibly the Bengals. But their pass game, Josh Allen's also in the top voter in the MVP conversation and just looks unbelievable. So for that reason, they're in at 2. And in at 1 is still the Lions. They're finding ways to win games by a lot. They haven't let up a single point in 3 weeks in the second half. They held the Colts to 6 points. And the only thing that's holding them back a little bit is they only scored 24 points against the Colts. And yes, I said only because their standard has been 50 over the past couple weeks. So I think their offense is the most unstoppable in the entire league, probably even better than the Bills, Ravens, and Bengals. And their defense has really stepped up even without Aiden Hutchinson. I just think they might be the most unstoppable team in the entire league, and they're coming in at number 1. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And with that, have a good Thanksgiving week, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.